Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 304, Occultism and Veganism. This was one, I thought I had covered it actually before, but I looked through the list and I couldn't find it, so I don't think I somehow ever did. Sort of to take off of the Occultism and Primitivism video that I did literally yesterday. Anyway, here are my thoughts on veganism from the sort of spiritual perspective. There are some occult schools that stress that veganism, or at least vegetarianism more often, are good. In some, they're necessary. There were certain ancient groups among the Greeks, certain schools, other cults, and I use cult in the non-pejorative sense, of course. Cult initially just means sort of basically like a sub-religious group. Like the cult of Dionysus, the cult of Aphrodite. There were some that would stress that vegetarianism, although veganism wasn't really a thing, was important, that it was spiritually cleansing. And most religions have some food prohibitions. There's hardly one that doesn't. For instance, Hindus, you're typically not going to have beef consumption. Catholics won't consume red meat during, I think it's Lent. Muslims won't consume pork products, and so on forth. Jews won't consume pork or certain shellfish, etc. I find the fascination of spiritual systems with food intake to be funny, because really the funniest one is more modern, which is Theosophy, in which they look at the Eastern paths. And I remember, I think it was a work by Annie Besant, actually, that was saying, well, it is good, ultimately, that adherents or initiates or whatever should become vegetarian, and that it actually did talk about veganism, which at the time, eliminating all animal products, although I don't think it used the actual term veganism, which was kind of revolutionary, especially in Western circles at the time in the early 20th century. That would have been a very strange concept to a lot of people. Vegetarianism less. And part of it is rooted just in human biology, specifically that we're averse to suffering. Humans have developed codependency or reciprocity with certain animal species, especially certain mammals. You'll find that the average person who is concerned with veganism would have less of a problem, ultimately, with stepping on a grasshopper than you eating a steak. There's a hierarchy that's created because of the human understanding of cognition. I would say, in my own personal belief, vegetarianism and veganism are good things. Vegetarianism specifically is healthier than either veganism or eating excessive amounts of meat. I would say that really health-wise, most of it is people eat the wrong kinds of meat, though. It's not meat eating that's bad. A good steak is a good steak. It's that a lot of people eat a lot of processed shit, hamburger, fried chicken, stuff like that, stuff that's bad for your body ultimately. A lot of the stuff, not the meat itself, but a lot of the stuff in the meat, the binder, preservatives and stuff, really was not meant to be consumed. Your body did not evolve with those things in the food chain until the last usually half century to a century. You shouldn't be eating them. No, you shouldn't eat sausage. I've had occasionally a sausage here, because I'm in the Netherlands, of course, it's unavoidable. That being said, is it healthy for me? No, it's not healthy when I eat a sausage. If I have a nice medium rare steak, that's considerably healthier. I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian. I have leaned towards wanting more vegetarian foods, though. It's partially for spiritual reasons. I do happen to believe that it's more efficient. The other part is just my own taste, though. I've learned how to cook now, and I've realized I can make some vegetarian dishes that are superior to most dishes that contain meat. I think a lot of people, they don't actually cook that well, and so they use meat and everything, meat and fats and stuff, because it's the only way to add the flavor, because they don't understand herbs, they don't understand spices, they don't understand balancing the flavor of other savory and hearty things, and so they compensate. But that has nothing to do with spirituality. Just to be clear, that's just my own personal taste preference. I would say veganism can be positive, but keep something else in mind. You're still slaughtering living things if you're a vegan. It's just that the living things that you happen to be consuming push back less against you trying to eat them and are less obvious about the fact that they're displeased with dying. And ultimately, being consumed should not be seen as philosophically separate from any other form of mortality. The reaction is the same, except the animal, in order to avoid dying, because evolution favors death avoidance, mortality avoidance. In order to avoid dying, it realizes that this plant is poisonous and won't eat it. So it simply goes away. It doesn't eat the plant. To avoid you eating it, it runs away from you. The latter is more obvious. There's more of a secondary impetus to the running as opposed to simply turning around, because the plant that's poisonous doesn't move, except in the wind. You're moving towards the pig, trying to spear it or trying to hit it over the head with a rock so that you can put it on a spit and roast it and have a pork dinner. Death is death is death. If anything, the fact that humans have at least taken some steps to avoid the animal being suffering in an undue manner, if anything, that is actually a positive philosophical move, as opposed to nature. It's like when you see people, like on Twitter or something especially, say, well, it would be nice if humans were more like animals. I mean, we are animals. We just happen to have more cognition than most of them, at least on this planet, other than our Anunnaki ancestors, supposedly. I think that'd be terrible. The animal in man is why humans are cruel. That cruelty is an evolutionary thing that's out of step with evolutionary levels beyond the simply biological. That's how animals act. Chimpanzees will rip each other's arms off randomly for no reason. This happens even within families. They'll randomly gang up and attack one of their other tribe members, which usually is related to many of the other people there, the chimpanzees, and they'll just beat them to death with rocks and shit. They go to war after a fashion. I guess bonobos would be an aside to this. If we were related more to them, we'd have fewer problems in the world, and we'd just be a bunch of hedonistic libertines having orgies all the time. There'd be a lot of humans and probably less technology, though, so keeping that in mind. Veganism, though, still requires the death of living things. It's just that the living things that you happen to be killing don't show displeasure at it in the same way. It's less obvious. That's number one. Number two is that animals are still dying as a result of human contraptions all the time. Roadkill in the road, birds getting chopped up by windmills. Vegans seem not to focus on these things. It's all about animal rights as long as the steak is on your plate. When it comes to a person defending themselves against a bear that might be predating upon them, all of a sudden the death is counted differently, even though it's still a death. And in nature, there's more suffering as the result of death. The death can be quite slow. Straggling on, starving of old age, and decrepency, disease of various kinds, getting predated upon. It's not a pretty sight when you see what lions do to their prey. Sometimes they'll literally toy with them, eat them from the inside out. Humans, at least upon predating upon other life forms, typically don't do that. We consider it abusive and even prosecute people for it. Veganism, therefore, I think is good, and vegetarianism, I think, is the best of all in many ways. And I try to limit meat intake in my diet simply because a lot of the stuff that I like to cook happens to be vegetarian or vegan. Like a lot of the Asian dishes, they don't have even any animal products in them. Coconut milk is the savory, and lots of herbs. That being said, while it can be a positive thing, I don't think that it's spiritually necessary for people to be vegetarian. I would say that the concept in their minds, the cognition, the ability to understand the suffering of other creatures, not just human, but other creatures below them, so to speak, that is what is of import. The ability to understand that. For instance, I completely object to factory farming. I think all farming should be free range. And I don't mean free range as in 1,000 chickens standing in a shed and they simply have the ability to move around in their half a square foot of space. I mean genuinely free ranging it. If this doubles the price of meat, then so be it. It's fine. That doesn't matter. There are other things that are capable of being eaten in a world that is more and more overcrowded, in which we do have limited space to actually create such resources. I would like it if farming were entirely cruelty-free. That being said, some people who are vegans and they'd say, well, even chicken farming is evil because they're male chickens, they get ground up. Well, you could do genetic modification to create a race of chickens that only creates like 99% female eggs. It's possible to do that. I guess no one's thought of it. With milking, I love it when they say, well, it's basically rape. You're attaching suction tubes to this cow's udders, sucking its titties dry. Try not doing that for a week and see what happens. The cow will explode and die. So just to be clear here, they've already been engineered through artificial selection for thousands of years. There's no going back now. Sorry, Bessie. That's about all. Peace out.